What's up, folks? It's been a while. I've spent the past couple of weeks living here listening to the Moondrop Blessing 2 and comparing these things to some of my favorite IEMs. I guess I'll get to which IEMs I compare them to in a little bit, but really these things are around 320 bucks, so not cheap, and they frankly better be comparable to my favorites, and so that's what I did. But yeah, living with these IEMs, I'm ready to let you guys know what I think. And while I'm doing that, I'm gonna go and do my spiel. This is a live stream. While you guys are watching, if you have any questions, either about the Moondrop Blessing 2 or some other IEMs I'm talking about, feel free to leave those questions in the live chat. And after the review, I'll get to those questions. And if you're watching this not live, what are you doing with your life? Go ahead and subscribe to the channel. You can subscribe to Super Review. Ding the notification bell, and I think that you will get alerted next time I do one of these live videos, so then we can interact. But let's go ahead and talk about the Moondrop Blessing 2, and like I typically do, I'm going to start by talking about the build and sort of the physical characteristics of this IEM, which, I don't know, what do you think about it? Let's take a look at it up close. So yeah, this is the Blessing 2, and just build-wise, I'm actually really pretty happy with it. You know, the overall build and style of this is kind of like a semi-custom molded acrylic shape that is, you know, like other IEMs of this type. It's opinionated, right? It is made for a person with a particular shape of inner ear. And if your ear isn't shaped like this, I could definitely see this being an issue. So it's not like quite as universal as something like the Maga OC K5, which is kind of going for a similar look, but I think that the K5 does it in a way that's a little bit more universal. I don't know. I think really the main thing with the Blessing 2, and this is something we talked a little bit about in the unboxing, there's two things to consider. One, this nozzle here, which I just took the tip off so you can take a look at the nozzle. The nozzle is definitely on the chonk side, and it's so chonk, in fact, that most of the tips that I have don't actually really fit on it. So I stuck with the stock Moondrop tips, and they were fine for me, thankfully. But it is worth calling out that if you are looking to apply your own tips to your IEMs, that there's a good chance that the nozzle in here might actually be a little bit too wide for you. That wide nozzle also has implications for fit. So I think a lot of people, I think some people are going to have issues with that nozzle being so wide. I've been wearing things like the Etymotics over here for a long time, and so I'm pretty used to having my ear canal stuffed up and plugged up with something fairly large, and so I didn't have so much of an issue with that tip or with that nozzle. But the bit that was actually a little bit more problematic for me, or at least challenging, was just the overall girth of this earbud. So I don't know if it really comes across here, but this thing is definitely on the wide side, and more so, I don't know if can you see that kind of looking down? You can kind of see that like the outer shape here is, you know, fairly large, but you can see that it actually like flanges outward, and that shape basically means that it takes up a lot of room in my ear. It also means that it is super, super secure. In fact, I would say that of all my IEMs, besides the Etymotics, I think the Blessing 2 is the most secure fitting thing in my ear. Now that said, the cost of that secure fit is it's just taking up a lot of space, and it can, you know, reduce comfort over long listening periods. Although, I'm gonna be honest, like, for me, it was an issue for the first couple of days, but then I got used to it. And I'm at the point now where, kind of like the Etymotics, these things were an issue for me initially, and then I got used to them. I'm in a very similar spot with the Blessing 2, so as large as it is, I'm actually pretty happy with it. It's not the most comfortable IEM that I've got, but compared to some other IEMs that I've got, it's not uncomfortable, and it is, again, super secure. That secure fit also has benefits for things like isolation. It isolates very well. And so I can show you real quick what it looks like in my ear. You can see that, like I was saying, it takes up quite a bit of space inside of the concha of my ear. I'm not a scientist. If you're a scientist, let me know if that's the right part of my ear that I'm describing. or if I'm even pronouncing that word correctly. But yeah, I don't know. That's about as much as I could tell you about the buds. I think that, you know, they look a little bit heavier than they actually are, so I don't have any issues with the weight on these things. As far as aesthetic, I think it's actually a really attractive looking IEM. My only quibble is I'm not the biggest fan of the Blessing 2 writing on the outside of here. Mostly I just don't like a lot of text on the outside of my IEMs. And well, over here on the left side, I've got the blank one because I didn't get it with anime inscribed on it. And for me, I'm happy with that. I don't know, if I were to like customize this, maybe you could do some pretty cool things if you wanted to customize it, but the stock look, I'm pretty happy with. One thing though you might notice, maybe you notice it, maybe you didn't notice it. The cable that's on here is not actually the stock cable. The cable that I've got here is actually a cable from the Moondrop Starfield, which is another IEM that I've reviewed before. And the reason for that is not because I necessarily like this cable any more than the cable that came with the Blessing. It's just that the cable that came with my Blessing actually didn't work out of the box. It didn't work right. There was like a weird channel imbalance, and I found it kind of confusing, and then I threw on this Moondrop Starfield cable and it solved it. So it's been sitting here on this cable for a while, and it's actually given me a little bit more appreciation for this cable than what I originally had with the Starfield. And I'll also just take this moment to say that in terms of build, this cable is basically exactly the same as the cable that came with the Blessing 2. But yeah, it's a fairly nice cable. The only thing, like small complaint, and here I'll punch in the close-up for you. My only small complaint is that this thing here at the Y-split is just a little bit chunky, and it means that packing this thing up and coiling these earphones and putting them away, this thing kind of gets in the way. There's also no chin slider, which for me is not the biggest deal. Especially with these, because they fit so securely. Usually when I like a chin cinch, it's when an IEM doesn't fit that securely, and having a chin cinch can help. These things, like I just got done saying, fit about as secure as anything else I've got. So yeah, overall, I would say very happy with the build, you know, provided that, you know, I assume anybody else that buys this thing, if you get a cable that's bad, like the cable I got, you'll be able to swap that out and get a replacement. No problem. So yeah, that's the build of this thing. Again, like while I'm reviewing this, if you have any questions, any specific questions about the build, feel free to hit me up in the live chat and I'll get to you in just a bit. But now let's go ahead and talk about the sound. And that is where, you know, I actually didn't really know what to expect with the Moondrop Blessing 2. So I know that it is a, 4 balanced armatures and 1 dynamic driver IEM. So it's a lot of drivers, and the fact that they went through the trouble to add a dynamic driver kind of gives me the impression that they are looking to be a nice bassy IEM. But I was actually surprised, and for me, for my tastes, if you have been watching this channel and you know my tastes, I was pleasantly surprised. So I would actually say that despite the fact that these things are rocking a dynamic driver in the sort of hybrid configuration, this is actually not a very bassy IEM. And if you're looking for a very bassy IEM, I think you'll be disappointed with the Moondrop Blessing, but I wouldn't give up on it yet. So overall, I would kind of describe the sound signature on here as actually fairly neutral, with a slight bit of treble emphasis. But mostly, really, the aspect of the sound signature that really comes across and feels the strongest to me is in the mid-range detail. The mid-range on this IEM is just fantastic. And if you're into mid-range, if you like vocals, you like the various instrument separation and stuff like that that happens within the mid-range, the Blessing 2 is really pretty excellent. I mentioned that the treble is a little bit elevated, and it is. It's a little bit, I would describe the treble as closer to sharp and less like tizzy or airy. Frankly, if I were, you know, to have any serious complaint about the sound quality on here, it's just, I could use for a little bit extra treble air. I think that the treble sharpness, which is kind of like in the lower treble area, is plenty, and I think a lot of people might actually, in fact, have some issues with the lower treble here. It's not to the point that it's sibilant for me, to my ear. And it's not to the point that it is fatiguing for me, but again, I'm kind of a treble head, not so much of a bass head. So for me, that's good. If you're a bass head or a little bit sensitive to treble, I would just take into consideration the fact that the lower treble in here does have a bit of emphasis. And then we get to the bass, and I described this as not a bassy IEM, and it's not, but I think the bass is really quite well done. So if this was just an all balanced armature IEM, you know, the thing that it honestly sounds the most like to me, that at least what I get out of this reminds me of what I get out of another IEM, it is the Etymotic ER4. And I like the Etymotic ER4 a lot, although, I mean, I've got the complaint that it's a little two-dimensional because it's a single BA. Not so the case here, although, well, we'll get to that. But the big problem for me with the Etymotic ER4 is just that the bass response, you know, it's not that it's not elevated enough, it's just kind of a little dead sounding, and I don't get that here with the Blessing, ostensibly because it's got that dynamic driver handling the bass. So the bass ramp up is very, very gradual and very slow, and it doesn't seem to me like the bass is anywhere near close to intruding in the mid-range. In fact, I would say that, you know, the mid-bass is still pretty weak on the Blessing too. It's more that it's focused in that sub-bass region, which for me, that's where I want it, right? That's having that sub-bass emphasis just gives these things an added layer of depth and texture that you don't get with something like the Etymotic ER4. But like I was kind of alluding to, I mentioned that the treble's a little bit sharp for me, not a problem. If I were to actually like get serious about where does the Blessing 2 leave me wanting a little bit, I would say it's in two areas. One, the timbre is a little bit BA timbre, and that's not necessarily a bad or a good. It's just when I compare it to some of my favorite dynamic driver IEMs, there's like a physical something to the dynamic drivers that doesn't quite come across with the BAs. And then the other thing, and maybe this is more the side effect that I'm thinking about, it's just the separation and the layering and the sense that everything is, you know, staging around inside my head isn't quite as strong here with the Blessing 2 as it is with something like the JVC FD-X1, which we're going to get to in a little bit. Yeah, I just think that like staging and imaging, well, imaging is actually pretty good. It's more about the staging, and it just feels a little bit, I guess people would say, intimate. So there you go. Like, again, really the strength here is the mid-range clarity, the resolution in the mid-range, so good. And then the tonality in the treble is just about what I like. I could use a little bit more air, sure, but quite like that tonality. And then the bass impact is basically perfect for me. So I don't know, let's go ahead and go to the table and we will compare these to some other IEMs. So I did pull in the Moondrop Starfield here, and like I said, they're missing their cable because the cable is right here. But worth comparing these things to the Starfield, which, you know, is also, I think, very similar to the Moondrop KXXS as well as the Moondrop Canas Pro. And if you are coming from those IEMs and looking to the Blessing 2 as like sort of an upgrade, I think the Blessing 2 is actually, I much prefer the sound here of the Blessing 2 to the Starfield, but, and this is pretty important, the sound signature is very, very different, in my opinion. I think that the sound signature on the Blessing 2 is definitely much more mid-range, much more this is just a more forward sound, whereas with the Starfield and the other, you know, sub $200 Moondrops that I've tried, these things are definitely more about the bass. And they're not like massive elevated bass or anything like that. These things just kind of come across a little bit more V-shaped to my ear, and the mid-range doesn't get the emphasis that I like. The mid-range is fine, like the mid-range is pretty well done here on the Starfield, but it's just on another level here with the Blessing. Let's go ahead and put those things aside and pull in the Etymotic ER4 XR, which I just got done describing. These things remind me of the Etymotics, and it's not that they have like the exact same sound signature, although I think they're fairly similar. I think they're more similar than they're different. They're both going for a very neutral sound, And you know, here I've got the XR, so they've got both got a little bit of a bass emphasis. However, the bass on here is just so, it's like another level. The bass here on the XR, it's still a single balanced armature driver, and they're doing what they can with a single BA, but it doesn't hold a candle to the bass here. It's just got a lot more texture and a lot more, like you feel the bass a lot more than you do with the Etymotics. What else could I say? I would say that treble, I actually prefer the treble a little bit on the ER4s, although neither of these is an especially airy sounding IEM, but mostly it's just kind of like the layering, the separation, I find to be much stronger here in the Blessing 2 than it is on the Etymotics. So for my tastes, like, I might be kind of retiring the ER4. I mean, it's a good IEM, don't get me wrong, but I feel like the Blessing 2 does what I want from the ER4, but better. And then that brings us to here, the JVC FDX1, which is around 250 bucks. So these are 320, 250. The Etymotics are usually around like 350, maybe around 350. So these are all roughly in the same price range. But here with the FDX1, the big difference is this is a single dynamic driver IEM, and I think that because of that, well, certainly at least partly because of that, the general timbre and the character of the sound just takes on different characteristics than the sound of this, right? So again, this is actually somewhat similar in terms of tonality, like it's a relatively neutral sound. I think there's a little bit less upper mid-range lift than there is here. So you get a little bit more upper mid-range here. This is a little bit, I guess, flatter, but also maybe a little bit thinner in the lower mid-range. Treble levels, I would say, is fairly similar, although I would say that the treble detail comes across a little bit stronger on the FDX1. And I think also the big difference is that in the bass impact, the FDX1 bass is just my favorite. And again, it's not an especially elevated bass. I think if you're looking for a bassy IEM, you might actually be disappointed here with the FDX1. It's just much more about like the physical aspects of it, the impact, the slam, I guess you could say, of the FDX1 is just really quite good. And you know, it's good, it's quite solid here on the Blessing 2, but it's something that the FDX1 does a little bit better. I mean, I think overall, like, just in terms of texture and separation and detail and staging, I think the FDX1 does a little bit better job than the Blessing 2, but I do think that the resolution on the mid-range of the Blessing 2 is a little bit above the FDX1. So, I mean, which one do I prefer sound-wise? It's actually kind of tough for me. I think if I had to pick one just purely on sound, I'd probably stick with the FDX1, but the fit, honestly, is going to be a big deal for me. And if you've been watching my reviews before, you know that fit is a big deal for me. And for me, this thing fits much better. It's just a lot more secure of a fit. It's an easier fit. These things are still a little bit fiddly for me to fit. So as much as I love the FDX1, and as much as like I think I prefer the sound to the Moondrop Blessing 2, it's close enough that the fit difference is going to mean that this is going to be the earphone that I end up actually using more. So yeah, I mean, those are kind of my main comparisons with the Blessing 2, and those are my thoughts. I talked about the build, talked about the sound, so let's talk about the score. And out of 5 stars, I think I'm going to go ahead and give the Moondrop Blessing 2 a solid 5 stars. You shouldn't be very surprised because I just got done saying a lot of really nice things about this earphone. I think that fit-wise, it's great. You might have to get used to it. And if you have small ears, you might never get used to it. So I think that's something that's very worth keeping in mind. But for me, it ended up getting to a point where I love the way that these things fit. Are they the most comfortable? No, I think the Mago OC-K5 is a little bit more comfortable and easier for me to sleep in, but I'm still able to sleep in these. So yeah, build quality, fit, I'm pretty happy. And then sound, obviously, I just got done saying how much I love the way that these things sound. These things are, to me, what I wanted Etymotic ER4s to be. There's a little bit of bass emphasis, but for most people, I think honestly, if you're looking for a bassy IEM, you'll be disappointed with the Blessing 2. I, however, am not looking for a bassy IEM, so I love the Blessing 2. The bass here is just perfect. So yeah, it's got the fit, it's got the sound. I give it 5 stars. That's about as much as I can say. If you're interested in checking out the Moondrop Blessing 2, of course, I'm gonna add links in the description down below. And while you're down there, you can hit the like button for the video if you liked it, subscribe to the channel, and then I'll see more of me on the next super review. I'll see more of you. And then now, let's get to some questions. All right, let's see. Let me pull over my mouse. All right, let's see. We got some questions. We got a few. I know Coffee Beats Official was earlier asking me about looking for an IEM using as a studio monitor to produce hip hop beats. And I actually think the Moondrop Blessing would not be a bad option. Now, it's obviously not the cheapest option, but it wouldn't be a bad option because it is mostly a neutral sound signature. And it's got enough bass body to it that I think it would be pretty satisfying for producing hip hop beats. You're also asking about the Shure SE215, and I would absolutely advise against the Shure SE215. I don't like that IEM very much. I think it fits great. I just think that sound signature wise, it's very warm and bassy and kind of muddy. What else have we got going on in here? Intuit Reviews is in the live chat. Live review, that's right, I did it live. I think it went okay, let me know. Sebastian Alcaron saying, feeling #blessed to have more quarantine content to watch. Cool, that sounds like you might be, are you an MKBHD viewer? Quarantine content, I can't steal that trademark. But yeah, I am producing content from within quarantine, so I guess it counts. Elrex is saying, ouch, sounds like an unexpected quality control issue from a pricey IEM. And yes, obviously it's very disappointing to get a $320 IEM and have a cable on it that is defective, but I don't hold that against it because look, I get so many different IEMs, right? And if 1 out of 100 IEMs that I get has a bad cable, it doesn't mean that Moondrop has a quality control issue. It means that I had a bad cable and it happened to come with the Moondrop Blessing. So I have no doubt that Moondrop or whoever, whatever retailer you buy this from would connect you with a replacement cable. So I'm not too worried about that. And again, I'm using a Moondrop cable in its place and it's been quite fine. So I'm not too concerned about that. Willy Boy asking, how does the bass compare to the ZS10 Pro? So the KZ ZS10 Pro, I think the ZS10 Pro has got more elevated bass than the Moondrop Blessing. I think the ZS10 Pro is a very, very traditional sort of V-shaped sound, more upper mid-range, lower treble V. Yeah, and it's got, I think, more sub-bass emphasis, although I prefer the bass here to the ZS10 Pro, if that was also your question. Elric saying, sounds like Harman neutral tune, just like Blessing 1. Maybe, I don't really know, like the terms like Harman, diffuse field and stuff like that, I don't use those a lot for myself, but maybe it's Harman neutral. Dow is asking, can I compare the treble sharpness to that of the T3? And yeah, I would say that the T3 treble is, I would expect that more people will have issues with the T3 treble than they will here. The treble here, it's actually kind of similar to the Etymotics in that it's just a little bit forward in the lower treble region, not super spiky and sharp. The T3, I think, tends toward a little bit closer to spiky and sharp. I think also the T3 sounds, the treble's maybe a little bit airier, so the elevation might be a little bit further, a little bit of a higher frequency elevation than it is here with the Blessing 2, but I'm not looking at graphs, so I'm not actually sure that that is true. Joseph Jang asking, can I review the CCA C12? And unfortunately, no, I'm not going to take a look at that one. I'm trying to remember the C12. I did a review of the C10. And I like that one okay. It was a little bit warm and fuzzy from what I recall. The C12, I don't know too much about that one at the moment, so sorry. Stefan Dela Cruz saying, hey, yo, super dude. What's up, Stefan? And then this other name, which appears to be in Japanese, I can't read that. Do I play games with IEMs? And the answer is no, not really. Mostly when I game, I use actually the COS KPH30i. In fact, I've got it connected to my PS4 controller right down there. And that's just because when I'm gaming, I like having an open sound. I don't like the feeling of an IEM, especially if I'm like on a mic talking to my friends, playing Apex Legends lately. And when I'm doing that, having my ears plugged with an in-ear monitor like this, for me, is not my favorite. I like to be able to hear myself a little bit more. And I think also just I don't want to close myself off too much from my surroundings. So I like an open back like the KPH30i. Stefan Dela Cruz, 5 stars. What? Are you surprised? I don't know. Was there something I said that surprised you about why this thing got 5 stars? If there is, I don't know. Ask me to elaborate on it a little bit. Maybe I said something that gave you the wrong impression. Sebastian also asking off topic, but I'm curious, do you know if I keep track of the stuff you review, maybe an Excel sheet with the pros and cons? Sebastian, that's actually an interesting question because I do. I've actually been sort of working on an alternative rating scale. It's not really an alternative to my 5-star rating scale. It's just a little bit of a different view of it because, you know, one thing that maybe is not clear, but I hope that it's at least somewhat intuitive, is that for me, 5 stars for a $30 headphone like the KPH30i is not the same as 5 stars for a $300 headphone like the Sennheiser HD600. And it's not that I necessarily expect that more money means better sounding. It's definitely not always the case, but more money, different expectations, right? If there are some drawbacks to the KPH30i, if the resolution isn't the highest and if the build quality isn't the greatest, that's fine. It's 30 bucks. I still think that's a 5-star headphone. At 300 bucks, my expectations change. And so I guess what I was getting at is this other sort of review scale spreadsheet that I've been working on is a list of all the audio equipment that I've reviewed with star ratings at certain prices. And so you could say, take something like the KPH30i and say at $30, that's a 5-star item. At 50 bucks, would my review change? Maybe it would. Maybe my recommendation would change just because at 50 bucks, you've got different options. And so that's what I'm working on. I think maybe in a future video, I'll talk a little bit more about that rating system. And hopefully it makes sense to people and hopefully it's actually useful. All right, let's see what else we got. Radiant Lokasan saying, I've seen many lives, but you totally nailed it. Your production is on point. Excellent. I'm glad that the production is coming across. I don't know if you guys ever have questions about the production. That's frankly half the fun for me, is figuring out how to do all this stuff. Anyway, could I review the KXXS at some point? Also, are you planning on reviewing the new Blonde? So the KXXS, I probably won't do a separate review of that because I did a review of the Starfield, and when I listened to the KXXS, it seemed to me basically indistinguishable. I like the way that the KXXS looks a lot better than the Starfield, right? As a reminder, here's the Starfield, and I don't know, aesthetically, it's not my favorite. I think the KXXS aesthetically looks really cool, but sound-wise, it seemed to be indistinguishable to me from the Starfield, and so my review of it would probably be basically the same as the Starfield. It just cost about 60 bucks more. Orcs LCX ICX is asking this or the Mago OC K5 V2. So, I mean, I gotta say up front, like I haven't heard the other versions of the Mago OC K5. I know there's like a base version, there's a Mago OC K6, there's just so many different IEMs out there, so I can't compare it to something I haven't heard. But obviously I have heard the original K5 or the K5. Even the K5 I have is the V2 because they released it in 2 different stages with different cables, and I believe I've got the V2, but I think it's the same too. Anyway, this versus the K5, I think that fit-wise, there's a lot for me to still like about the K5. the K5 is just one of my favorite IEMs still, and it's, you know, costs almost half what the Blessing 2 costs. In terms of sound signature, I think that the mid-range resolution on the Blessing 2 is definitely standout. And I think also the sub bass on here is definitely better than the bass that you get on the K5. When the K5 bass is a little bit more on the mid-bassy side, it's not like mid-bassy to the point that it becomes warm at all. It's just more about kind of the impact that it gives you as you're listening to it. So I prefer the bass here, I prefer the mid-range here. The treble, I actually might prefer the treble on the K5, although, oof, that one's kind of tough because I think the treble is a little bit, it's better executed here, right? It's a little bit less, it's better controlled, I think, and a little bit more refined. Although in the K5, it's just got a little bit more of an airiness to it. And overall, I think the sound signature of the K5 is a little bit more fun than the Blessing 2. I think the Blessing 2 is more neutral, whereas the K5 being still relatively neutral, bright neutral IEM, it feels a little bit more fun and a little bit more stagey than the Blessing 2. So I don't know, it depends on what you're looking for. Personally, I think that I'm gonna end up using the Blessing 2 more, although we'll see, you know, there's certain scenarios where the fit of the K5 is gonna make that one win out. Oh, also, I forgot to respond to the part of Radiant's question about the new blondes. I do think I will be getting a review sample of those soon. Well, soonish. They're being sent over from overseas, so it might take a while, but I do think that that is coming. 21 saying, oh, this is live. I thought I was watching a premiere. Yep, this is actually live. In fact, I've just read your comment. And if you're watching the VOD, because this is going to be available as a VOD, and you want to be in on this live conversation, subscribe to the channel, and I think hit that little bell, because that'll notify you when I go live. And you can watch me while we're doing this thing live. Dow, I remember you loving the P1, you still go for it. For example, if you go to grab between the Rose Mini 2 versus the Shozy versus the P1, which do I grab? This is one of the weird things about being in my position where I've got access to all of them, is that it can vary depending on my mood. The P1 I do still quite like quite a bit. In fact, one of the things that I really like about the P1 is the extended treble on it. It is not a very sharp treble versus this. I think that the lower treble here has a lot more emphasis than the P1. It's more in the extended treble where it can give things like cymbal strikes and I don't know, just kind of like the transient elements of organic, natural, acoustic music. It can give that a really nice tactile, organic sense that I don't quite get with the Blessing 2. And that's okay, I don't need every IEM to do the exact same thing, so that's definitely something that I like about the P1. Otherwise, I think I do prefer, well, the mid-range resolution, again, on the Blessing 2 is quite standout. And so I can't really compare them head to head. I think that the P1 is a little bit more of a flatter, warmer sound, whereas these tend to a little bit on the bright side. And then versus the Shozy CP, I actually have some bad news, as I accidentally just recently broke my Shozy CP. And now I gotta make the decision, am I gonna buy another pair, a replacement pair, when I've already got more headphones than I can listen to, and I'm really pretty tempted to buy a replacement pair, but I do have the CP that I've unfortunately destroyed. It's bad news. And then the Rose Mini 2, I actually haven't had those in my possession for a couple of months. I've lent them out. I still quite like the Mini 2. I think that tonality-wise, look, that's a much cheaper IEM, and so my expectations are a little bit different. But I think tonality-wise, the Mini 2 is a warmer tune with actually some of that upper treble zing that the Tin P1 gives me. So for that, I actually still really quite like it. In fact, it gives it a pretty nice stage, but I don't know, the Rose Mini 2, if I go to that IEM, mostly it's just because I like the fit and I'm doing something where that fit is a benefit. Whew. Francis Herrera is asking, have I got my hands on the The Audio Legend 3s? No, I haven't heard anything from The Audio. Have not heard any of those. I borked my KPH30i, and I'm still waiting for replacement, but shipping is a nightmare today, and what IEMs under 150 is good for gaming. Okay, so you're asking me about using IEMs for gaming. I still don't use IEMs for gaming, so unfortunately my answer is I still don't use IEMs for gaming. I don't know which one's good for gaming. Anything that's got, you know, nice staging probably, or nice imaging, nice precise imaging. And I don't know, the Blessing 2 is probably great for it. But it's going to give you a very sealed fit, and if you're talking to somebody, it could be a problem. Just be uncomfortable. Waris Amira is asking, have I looked into the FiO LCBT2 Bluetooth cable? And I have not. You say it's got some tasty specs. Maybe it does. Yeah, I don't know. I tried out a couple of Bluetooth cables, you know, a year or so ago. And I found that they had some obvious shortcomings, but also I just found that I didn't actually want to use my IEMs over Bluetooth. I've also got, you know, the, oh man, what is it called? The Ear Studio ES100 or the Radson ES100, which is this little Bluetooth receiver. I got it because, you know, people love this thing and I wanted to check it out and see if it was something that does much for me. And unfortunately I found that I don't really use it just because I don't know, IEMs, when I'm doing this whole thing, I'm trying to maximize sound quality, and introducing Bluetooth into the equation is just kind of inherently compromising that. And if I'm gonna go ahead and Bluetooth compromise, I'll probably just go for something like my AirPods. Let's see. Being asked if I'm going to try the iFi Hip DAC or Zen DAC, planning to upgrade for my PC onboard sound. I don't have any plans to at the moment, no. As far as like DAC and amp, I'm still pretty satisfied with the little shit stack that I've got over here, which is again Shit Modi 3 and Shit Valley 2. I know the iFi, I guess the Hip DAC is a little bit more of a portable DAC amp, and for me that's not something I end up using just because I'm mostly using IEMs. I don't need a lot of power when I'm being portable. So for me, my standalone DAPs like my Sony A100, totally fine. I don't know. I think that's gonna be just about it. So that is the Moondrop Blessing. Again, 5 stars out of 5. This is gonna be one of my favorite IEMs from here on out. Very neutral sound with just the right amount of sub bass to give it a nice texture, just the right amount of treble emphasis to keep it fun, but mostly a neutral sound signature. And if you're looking for something bassy, you won't love it. If you're looking for something neutral, I think you will. That is this video. If you're interested, again, in watching these future videos, please subscribe to the channel. Ding that bell or something. Is that what I'm supposed to say? Ding the bell. And then I'll see you on the next super review. Cheers.